Okay, I'm just going to give it a few moments to have everyone come into the virtual space with us, and then we'll start our EDI chat on publishing in publishing books and broader continuing the conversation about publishing and EDI concerns. And I'll just remind everyone, if you can please mute your mics, that will help with the quality of the audio. Thank you. Right, so I think we'll get started then. Hello, and welcome to another EDI Cafe Chat, where we once again will be discussing broader gaps in publishing. My name is Dr. Amanda Chisholm, and I'm Senior Lecturer at the School of Security Studies for King's College London, and I'm also the chair of this chat and the broader New Voices seminar series. So if you recall, we had a similar chat around publishing gaps with Professor Andrew Dorman, the commissioning editor for International Affairs, back in September. And we talked about the journal's Gender Parity Publishing Challenge that it set itself, as well as other initiatives the journal was taking on to improve representations of multiple voices, perspectives, and authors within their journal. Today we'll be talking about publishing concerns, but within books and book series themselves. So similar to journals, there is also a gap in whose research gets published as a book, how these books get marketed and promoted more widely, and well as the broader issues around mentorship and management from manuscript to book process. Challenges book editors face are similar of those of journal editors, such as encouraging wider participation and outreach in getting diverse voices and authors to submit to these different series, supporting those with English that might not be their first language, supporting early career researchers, women, BAME, and LGBTQI authors as well. All of this becomes, I think, more acute when we face a pandemic, such as the one we're in now, which significantly impacts these same identified communities. Colleagues who are currently without full-time employment, being pulled in multiple directions while attempting to conduct the kind of research and rigor required to get published. So the broader material implications that play into who gets published and who doesn't. But what I want to focus on today in our chat is some of the positives, in particular what we can and are doing as editors of book series to address some of these challenges. I'm personally inspired by advances in critical military studies book series with Edinburgh University Press, whose editors are Victoria Basham and Sarah Balmer, who adopt a particular feminist approach and feminist ethics to their book series, and we can discuss that a bit later. So we are joined today by Dr. Victoria Basham and Dr. Catherine Baker. Victoria Basham is an editor-in-chief of Critical Military Studies and a co-editor of Edinburgh University Press, the series I just mentioned. Her research examines how war and war preparedness shape people's daily lives and how daily life can in turn influence and facilitate war and other geopolitical outcomes. She is particularly interested in how gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, and social class shape the prioritization and the use and preparation of military force, especially in liberal democratic societies, and the wider gendered politics of violence itself. Catherine Baker is an editor for a recent volume, Making War on Bodies, Militarism, Aesthetics, and Embodiment in International Politics, that was published through this series. And I have to give a spoiler alert, the book is amazing, and I recommend that you read it or get your libraries to order it so you and your students can read it. Catherine is a post-Cold War military historian and an expert in post-conflict Yugoslavia, Serbia, and Croatia. Catherine's work is internationally recognized for particularly how she presents a queer and post-colonial feminist account of war, militarism, and nationalism, drawing particularly upon cultural artifacts and practices inclusive of music, film, and fiction. Throughout Catherine's academic career, she remains curious of how how geopolitics of war and nationhood play out in everyday and in the sites of popular culture. She remains a leading expert on gender and critical military studies. So both Catherine and Victoria are here today to respond to any practical or otherwise questions you may have for them. The format of this discussion follows firstly by me as the chair, posing some predefined questions or pre-articulated questions to both Victoria and Catherine. And after this, we open the floor to you, the audience, to pose any further questions that you may have. And we welcome all questions. You can either put them in the chat box where I'll read them out loud to Victoria and Catherine, or you can raise your hand, your Zoom hand, and ask them yourself live. Right, so shall we now begin, Victoria and Catherine? Are you both ready? Okay, great. Great, so the first question, I guess I'll pitch to both of you, but maybe Victoria, as your position of series editor, you can respond first, is given, you know, kind of the broader acknowledged gaps in publishing around who gets published and who doesn't, and what gets published and what doesn't, what are the key issues you as a series editor have identified in your own experiences?
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you for having me here today. I think one of the things that we're kind of currently trying to think about quite a lot is where our blind spots are and where we kind of fail to kind of reach out to people sufficiently, and how we can actually practically and logistically kind of overcome that. And I have to say, with the Edinburgh University Press Book Series, one of the things that's been really valuable to us is that the press themselves are pretty attentive to that. So there's been times when we might be working with an editor, and often that's, you know, certainly with Catherine, you know, she's identified these kind of blind spots herself and said, you know, I think we really need some extra contributors here. And the press have kind of been very sort of understanding around those things, and are keen to kind of sort of say, well, yeah, you need different kinds of voices here. You need you know, you need a plurality of kind of voices, and that's, you know, that could be in terms of scholars at countries, sort of countries where scholars are working, or it can be case studies, or it could be, you know, different kinds of voices and perspectives that they think are missing. And it's very nice to work with a press in that case that does think about that. And I think one of the reasons that they're quite attentive to those issues is that they've done a lot of thinking about this. Being a university press, you know, it's a sort of joined up thing, thinking about the university environment, higher education more widely. I think that helps them. And also I think they're just attentive to the fact that there are a lot of white middle class women in publishing, and so that's increasingly reflected among editors like myself, but it's also a lot of commissioning editors and so on come from those kinds of backgrounds. And you know, partly it's about trying to make sure those are not the only people who get to commission things, but it's also making sure that if those are the people commissioning things, they're not just commissioning stuff that they're familiar with, and you know, the kinds of faces and voices and perspectives that they're familiar with. And so part one of the kind of issue there is recognizing that, I think, and thinking, okay, you know, these are the kinds of titles I might normally go for, or these are the kinds of perspectives I would expect to see. What else might I be missing? And actually doing that intellectual thinking around that to try and sort of actively then go out and try and find those things. And I know that's something Catherine in particular did with her title, which she can talk about herself, but it's something that helped us, I think, as series editors, and also the press themselves had been very clear from the beginning of our contract with us that we should be thinking about those things too. So they've worked really well with us to try and do that, and that's a conversation where we're very much hoping to continue, and we want to keep taking stock of where we are and making sure that we are doing the work and the labour that's necessary to make sure this is the case. So it'll be things as well like expanding our editorial board as well, and making sure that particularly because the way that we use our editorial board is often to support early career researchers, we want to make sure that we're giving them the sort of support they need, and that the people on that board are attentive to these issues themselves, and don't, you know, they make constructive comments, and they don't come with kind of, you know, viewpoints that exclude, but they come in the spirit of inclusivity and, you know, wanting us to get the best titles for the series and to be able to amplify this diversity of perspectives and ideas.
That's really interesting. I think, the broader self-reflection, opening up to conversation and to critique and voices from, constructive feedback from other contributors or authors is key. And I think I like how you discuss about the editorial board too, because that also helps professionalize and develop junior scholars as well throughout that process. I guess, Catherine, maybe as a book editor of a fab book. I am going to keep promoting your book. Can you tell us maybe what are some concrete measures you took to make sure that the book had a diversity of voices and perspectives and authors?
Absolutely, yes. I think, Victoria's already kind of mentioned the big one, which is being able to be reflective and, understand where your own gaps in perception are going to be. So, I'm obviously coming to this as a white woman from an Anglophone country. And, I bring a certain amount of, regional diversity with me in terms of experience, but not background. Because I'm working on Croatia and Western Balkans a lot. But that's nowhere near actually having a a global perspective. Or of course having had to have gone through the academy as someone who someone who's from the global south, from a racialized background, or from any background where you're working in your second language if you're writing in English. And language, I think, is something we need to keep talking about. But I mean, in terms of approaching the approaching the diversity of the book, I think first of all, my immediate starting point was I can't have an all-white table of contents. I didn't manage that with my last edited volume, partly because that was on Central and Eastern Europe, and nobody who I was even able to approach who was a black scholar was able to commit to it. Though in terms of the the national backgrounds people were coming from, there was I wanted to make sure that it had a balance of people writing from outside the region and people writing from within it. So I didn't manage not to have an all-white table of contents with the last volume I edited, but for something like this, which isn't regionally bound, it was essential that I had one. And part of that was then, okay, how do I conceptualize the topic in the first place in a broad enough way that it's going to widen the pool of people who might be able to write about it. So I thought, okay, if we're going to talk about militarization, I have to make sure that there's something in there, about armed about armed movements for racial justice and racial liberation. One of the things I thought, okay, we must have something on Black Panthers if you're going to talk about militarization and aesthetics and embodiment. And I was really pleased when I reached out to Amy Bugongiri, who isn't part of CMS Networks, just doing very relevant work, and she was absolutely thrilled to be approached. It's almost a little bit more of a risk as an editor, going outside the silo of field that your volume or your series is framed as contributing in. So in a sense, as an editor, that's something that you've really got the power to do, to go outside that and to be able to bring in people working in parallel fields whose work will actually enrich the whose work will actually enrich the discipline that you're talking to. So I think that was something the book achieved well. In other regards, I would have liked, we've got contributions about the Middle East. We don't have any Middle Eastern authors in there. So that I think is something that could have done better. Partly that was a consequence of people I did reach out to already being overwhelmed and overcommitted, or striking a different balance between activism and academic output. and not, simply not having time for it. And, again, it is, it's marginalized scholars, it's scholars from the global south, it's, as well as early career researchers in general, who are more likely to be in circumstances where they're not able to contribute and, do the unpaid labour that academic writing generally is. If the publishing world worked differently, and if there was some remuneration for book contributors, then that might be different. But it does affect however you are as an editor to get people who aren't in full-time ongoing salaried positions to contribute.
Thank you both so much for your frank and candid discussions, in particular, your reflections on how to get contributors. I think, what you both highlight is a commitment, a fundamental commitment to inclusivity and equality is key at the foundation, right? At the foundation of this, to recognize already, I'm not going to have an all white kind of, table of contents, right? And I actually, the chapter you highlighted on Black Panthers, that's one of my favorite chapters in the book. I think it has such a vibrant and fascinating way of, speaking about militarism beyond what I'm familiar with, right? So, which I think it was such a rich contribution. And yeah, the broader materiality of all of this, right? Of, people having competing interests, and it's generally those people that you want very much to contribute and promote are the ones that are the most disenfranchised, right? And have so many competing interests that impact whether they can contribute in these spaces. Victoria, I just wonder if you can, speaking about, critical military studies as a journal as well, if you can speak about maybe some concrete activities you guys are doing to promote, in particular, engagement with ECRs. So why should ECRs, be encouraged to publish with you?
Thanks, Amanda. I think it's fair to say that critical military studies, both as a journal and a book series and generally a field, has been set up with early career researchers in mind from day one. A lot of this came about because when I was doing my PhD, I felt I ended up in a lot of rooms with a lot of white, quite senior middle class and upper middle class men in pinstripe suits. And I felt very much alone, and the kinds of perspectives and ideas I was trying to bring to the fore were not well received in those environments. But I also, unfortunately, had an experience when I was doing my PhD where a lot of the feminist community at that time were not kind of keen to engage with me because I wanted to speak directly to soldiers and I wanted to engage with the military as an institution. And I think that has shifted significantly in the last few decades. But when I was doing my research, I felt very alone. And then I started to realize that I wasn't alone, but there were a lot of people who were perhaps on the margins of their discipline, and they were often using sort of inter and transdisciplinary methods and ways of thinking about military power and militarism and so on that kind of made it hard for them to sort of articulate their project. And I felt it was really hard to articulate my project. So when I was first looking for a job out of my PhD, I kept trying to pitch myself as security studies, and people weren't really buying it. And they were sort of thinking, well, the military's not quite that, and we've broadened and we deepened and we've moved on. And I felt, and I had these conversations with colleagues, that I didn't want any early career researcher to be in that position where they were struggling to articulate the value of their research, because it was valuable, but it was about not being able to kind of say exactly how and why and how it fits. And because, again, this trans interdisciplinary issue, kind of made it hard, I think, for people to kind of sell themselves in their disciplines to get those things. So we set up all of this, and everything we do with that critical military studies label is essentially trying to help people get jobs. It's trying to help people to get promoted. It's trying to help people to articulate how awesome their research is. And it's trying to promote dialogue around that. and it's trying to grow as a community and reach out to all those people that may be on the fringes of their discipline, maybe working in institutions that are far-flung, who don't usually get the amplification that they deserve for their research. That's the whole point of it. And so we have to be attentive to these inclusion issues, because that's the whole point of the critical military studies community and its project. So on a concrete level, we try to do things like, be constructive. We try to approach peer reviewers who we know will not be reviewer two, right? Who will hopefully, we have quality control over that. So we rarely get nasty reviews from reviewers, but if we do, we as editors take a deep breath and we think about how we're going to present that to authors. And we may even, we respect the integrity of peer review, but we will probably give a steer and some encouraging words around these things. We want people to feel that when they submit to us, that's part of a dialogue. It's not about being battered down, even if ultimately the decision we take, because we have to have quality control processes, is to reject something. I hope that anyone who walks away with a reject at least gets something from the process. We've also recently asked one of our associate editors, Rachel Woodward, who's in a great position because she's incredibly experienced. She's worked with a lot of early career researchers over the years as a mentor, and she's a geographer, which is a very trans and interdisciplinary field in and of itself. So she's attentive to different debates in different areas. She's going to sort of help with, when we get submissions that are very clearly from an earlier career researcher, perhaps if we think there's some merit in them but they're not quite ready for us, she's going to help us with kind of helping the authors identify exactly what they can do to sort of go away and improve that. So I'm very proud of that. And just one thing I wanted to touch on, which isn't necessarily specific to early career researchers, but just sort of carries on from something that you said a moment ago, Amanda, and I think Catherine touched on, which was about language. I think Catherine said this was really important. So one of the things I'm very pleased about and very happy to be able to report is we've got a special issue that's currently sort of going through, which is guest edited by some Brazilian colleagues, and a number of the contributors to that special issue, their first language is Portuguese. And I approached Taylor and Francis, our publisher, quite early on to say, look, it's really vitally important for us to be able to allow these scholars to publish their work in their first language, and then for us to also publish English translations alongside that. And they were very good about that and very accommodating about that, and that's going to go ahead. And I hope that sets a nice precedent as well for us, so that at the moment, we overwhelmingly, we only have contributions in the English language, but I hope that this special issue will kind of pave the way for us being able to have more kind of issues where we perhaps have the author's first language and a translation that opens this work out. The other thing, just to briefly mention, to think about is open access. I wonder, there's kind of a lot of debates about this, and there's a lot of problems with it, and the publishing kind of market models aren't ideal. But I know that, in some ways it might be something we want to try and push for in higher education in the global north, because it does facilitate, journals and books being accessible to scholars in other parts of the world, and then becoming familiar with these series and these journals, and hopefully then submitting their work to us. So it's a problematic kind of and complex issue, open access publishing, but it could be a way that you could transfer some privilege from the global north in terms of some research funding and support for open access publishing to democratize to some extent some of the publishing initiatives that we have to wider parts of the world where resources may be an issue.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm really excited about those two initiatives. Well, in particular, the publishing in the language that's not English first. That's gonna. I would challenge other other presses to do something similar too. I'm going to actually throw just a wingnut question at you before the final kind of broader question. So hopefully I don't off-throw you. But I just wonder if you both can reflect on. And this, I guess, for me, I think hopefully hints at what ECRs or people from BAME, LGBT, kind of female, kind of working class communities can think about is when you both were ECRs, like Victoria said, when you were struggling to find a space or an outlet that that saw your contribution as important, reflecting on where you are both now, what sort of piece of advice would you give the younger version of yourself when you're still trying to get out there and get published? What's kind of key advice would you give yourselves now, going through what you've all gone through? See, that's a fun question, right? Either of you can jump in.
I think, to be honest, maybe my younger self might need to give my older self some advice, because I think I actually felt less insecure about where I'm publishing things and am I publishing them in the right place than when I was just starting out. The reason for that is I've come into working in international politics and related areas from, you know, what was actually a very interdisciplinary, language-based area studies kind of background. And, you know, it made things kind of more difficult in job market terms. You know, do I tell people I do history or what do I do, etc. But you know, in terms of publication, I really tend to just go by a rule of, okay, if it's a journal which has been publishing things I've been citing, then my work probably belongs in it, and not kind of thinking too much about how do I define it in terms of discipline, field, and so on. Because the sort of immediate scholarly community I was part of was more interested in, you know, things and themes than what discipline is this. So actually, as I'm, you know, I sort of hedge myself more, constrain myself more a bit now, because I'm more conscious of, you know, all of these disciplinary moves, and okay, does it really belong in that journal or that journal, or, you know, what kind of time of the review is going to give me if I send it there, you know, compared to, you know, just kind of not really knowing that was going to happen, and, you know, just sending it off and seeing what kind of feedback came back. And you know, luckily all of my feedback experiences pretty much were good ones. Probably the other thing actually that you know, that helped me at the start was I got involved with quite a few special issues as a contributor. So you know, my early articles mostly came from conference papers, and you know, the panel organizer had decided, okay, let's do something more with this. So you know, that was a really good ramp to kind of start off on. And you know, I then kind of got into a rhythm of, okay, once I've given it a conference, see if I can do something else with it. You know, even the things which, you know, weren't going to be special issues. So yeah, I think it's possibly, you know, advice to my younger self, you know, from my younger self to my older one than vice versa.
I love how you switched that around, Catherine. Thank you. Victoria, I know that was a wingnet question. Do you have any initial reflections?
It's a great question. I'm just I'm just like, oh, I need to think about that one. But yeah, I think it's very difficult, because I think early career researchers are in a different kind of environment now to the one that I was in. I think it was, when I was finishing my PhD, it was harsh and it was competitive and it was scary, and there were a lot of moments when I thought I wasn't going to be able to make it. You know, I was struggling to keep a roof over my head. You know, it was getting to that stage, and I was starting to think, you know, I've got to cut my, you know, losses here soon. But I think, you know, it's hugely competitive, and the pressure on PhD students to be publishing, you know, before they've finished, and to be publishing maybe a couple of pieces in, you know, supposedly whatever they are, top flight journals, etc., however those are defined, you know, is immense. And so, you know, for me to kind of, one of the things that I've learned to value is, you know, the sort of slow academia movement, and the ability to be able to try and concentrate on producing work of quality rather than work in quantity. But I think that's very hard for me to, you know, that's very easy for me to be able to kind of pitch that as someone who has a permanent job and is immensely privileged to have that. So, but I would hope that whatever pressures you know, early career researchers are facing, that they do things like they seek out mentorship, and they try and work, you know, they try and get people to read their work and help them and support them to get that work to the right stage. And they do sort of think about who their interlocutors are. So, I know it's easy to be sort of led by, things like metrics and job market pressures if you're applying to certain institutions. So I think those things, it's silly to say they're not important, but I think it's also important to make sure you're pitching your work and talking to who you want to talk to. I think when I was first publishing some of my stuff, I was trying to talk to people who I now have no interest in talking to, quite frankly, but maybe talking to them in the beginning was okay, and maybe that was enriching in some way, and it's not that I regret it, but I think it's important for people to be kind of true to their intellectual project. And because I think that does, it does win through, hopefully, not for everybody, obviously, because the structural situation is awful, but for a lot of people it does. And I really hope that we can sort of cling to that. Otherwise, it's a pretty bleak kind of set of prospects for everybody. But yeah, so maybe just thinking about who your interlocutors are, and just seeking out mentorship wherever that might be. And that could be peer-to-peer. It doesn't have to be someone senior. I think, a lot of the early work I developed, a lot of the help that I got was from people who were in the same sort of position as me. And, early career researchers are sharp. We use a lot of early career researchers and PhD students in particular as well, as reviewers at CMS, because they're brilliant. They're very sharp. They are on top of all the debates. They know what's going on. I wish we had more of them, and more of them stepping forward. One of the things that's really frustrating is they're often not very well represented on our institutional websites, especially outside of the US and the UK and Canada and places like that. But even in some websites in those countries as well, there's a terrible representation of PhD scholars, and we need to know who they are and what they're doing, because we need them, and we need them reviewing for us. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you both for your reflections. I think, thinking upon my own experiences in early career, I think I can also highlight how establishing a supportive research community around you, with, like you said, with the mentorship, with your peers, but also, reaching out to book series editors, reaching out to journal editors, having kind of a conversation about the work that you're doing, and those advice, gaining feedback and advice has been fundamental. And I think that just the peer support, where higher education can be quite a toxic, grueling experience. So having a community of people that have your back, right, and who will help you, lift you up, and dust yourself off, I think that's also really important. So yeah, I'm not going to ask the final question, because I think we've got a few questions here, and that's broader. We've kind of already talked about, how publishing itself is not in a vacuum, right? These social inequalities that appear in publishing appear in broader higher education, and rooted in broader structural inequalities within regional and global and what otherwise. So it's always important to think about these. But we have a question from Kirsten Tomiak that put it in the chat, but Kirsten, you also raised your hand. I'm not sure if you want to ask this question yourself, or would you rather me ask it?
I am very happy to ask my question myself, if this is okay. This is also the moment where I want to say hi to Victoria. Haven't seen you a long time since Cardiff. So basically my question is about these issues regarding language. When you talked about language, it was basically about the issue of English not being the first language, and that of course making for problems. So my experience in trying to publish is very often that is not just about English as a first language, but it's also about proper academic language. And I have been, before I came to academia, before I did my PhD at Cardiff University, I have been a journalist, a broadcast journalist, for some years. So my writing is still rather journalistic in this way, that I'm looking for very brief sentences, for trying not to use jargon, and to be to be understood. So, and I get comments usually on my writing which really range from wonderful readability and really great that you do it that way, to this is not proper academic language and you really shouldn't use words or expressions like this or that. And I wonder how that actually kind of, so if first I wonder if I'm oversensitive and if this is really kind of the thing, to what I probably wonder about is to what extent you need to be in that highly theoretical leaden, very jargon leaden academic lingo in order to be published. That's basically kind of, yeah, what I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Victoria or Catherine, both of you can weigh in on that. Important question.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, you know, I think the denying anyone their authorial voice is a huge problem. I think sometimes with the journal and indeed the book series, there are certain acts of translation that need to go on, but that's usually because someone might be quite immersed in their own disciplinary area. And because we're inter and transdisciplinary in our approaches and the kind of work that we publish, sometimes we have to say to scholars, you know, non-historians or non-geographers might not quite get that concept or something like that. And that's usually, so it's usually the other way. It's usually, can you translate the jargon so that a broader audience can understand these things? But I think it's highly problematic to kind of, yeah, to sort of censor the way that people communicate. I think it's more, as an editor, you're just trying to make sure that as broad a range of people can understand what's being communicated. So it's about, again, inclusivity rather than trying to shut things down, if that makes sense.
I think, yeah, I'd second that. I mean, the starting point for thinking about academic language is what we have as academic conventions in terms of language are the product of ways that a lot of white Anglophone men, plus some French and German ones, communicate with each other. So, you know, in terms of, you know, actually making, you know, how we write and communicate as academics, you know, more inclusive and, you know, push, you know, beyond, you know, inclusion and diversity towards transformative. You know, there's a political power in actually writing differently, and then, you know, that does run up against all the usual obstacles that feminist and queer and decolonial writing, etc., always does. So, you know, as an editor, you know, sort of my role is, you know, mediating between the author and the viewers, and, you know, exactly like you said, Victoria, making sure that people, you know, will be understood in the way they want to be understood, and have made, you know, mindful choices about how that works coming across. So, you know, I mean, the very first chapter in Making War on Borders, you know, starts with an autoethnographic vignette, you know, which is, you know, very different to the usual form of, you know, a kind of standard expository academic article, you know, and, you know, there's a very, very good reason for that. You know, when it comes down to us as reviewers, sometimes, you know, this is another hat that I wear, you know, to be able to make the author's case for them sometimes. So, you know, I've just been a reviewer on a queer decolonial piece that's meant to be going into a journal that's got something to do with ethnicity and migration. And, you know, I kind of realised when that came to me, okay, this is probably also going to go to reviewers who aren't getting why this is written the way it is, and, you know, why this is holding back some of the things that the conventional academic format would, you know, want to put out front. So when I, you know, writing the review for, you know, for that particular journal's audience, I had to say, okay, there is a reason why this is doing it, and, you know, then be able to comment on how well it was doing it. And as it's now had a revise and resubmit decision sets come back to me again. And, you know, when I saw what the other reviewers had responded, neither of them had got it at all. So I thought, okay, I'm really glad I wrote that review now the way that I did. So yeah, you know, what journals, editors, etc., you know, think of as readability, you know, is kind of culturally and politically marked. And, you know, exactly as you're saying, Victoria, you know, there's readability in the sense of, you know, making it more accessible to, you know, to the whole range of audiences that we want to be able to get it. And there's a kind of narrower definition of readability that I think, unfortunately, you know, we can run into still in a lot of places.
I think those are excellent points that you raise, and you know, thank you for also raising this question around language and readability too. And I just wonder, you know, for Catherine, your reflective approach as a reviewer is fantastic, right? And I just wonder, is there, like, I know I've done some reviews myself, and you know, there are some guidelines that journals will have for reviewers of kind of their expectations, but certainly I've never heard or I've never read any of those sorts of guidelines around, you know, reflecting upon issues around readability. And I just wonder if that is something maybe journals should also start getting their reviewers to reflect upon. But also just want to tag on that question. And I think there's, you know, there also has been an issue raised around who we cite, and often how queer, BAME, women, ECRs do not get cited, right? And I know that this is a very difficult issue for editors, but I wonder, is there any sort of thinking or reflecting on your part of how we can engage in more inclusivity around citation practices through the review process?
Yeah, I think this is a huge issue, and you know, it's one I've been thinking about myself. You know, I've sort of, you know, have I cited all the people I should have been citing? You know, who have I missed? Who have been my, you know, blind spots over the years in my own work? And I think, you know, we've kind of, with CMS, we've sort of relied on a particular community of people who are sort of attuned to those issues, but you can't assume that they always will be. So I think it's a really important one, and to that end, you know, just to go back to the thing about guidelines, it's something we're considering at the moment, whether we need to, we used to send out initially when we first started the journal guidelines, and then when we moved our submission system online, they kind of dropped out, and we haven't been as kind of clear. But you know, if reviewers contact us and ask us for guidance, we can, you know, we always sort of respond to that. But we are thinking about whether we should be attaching guidelines to that, and trying to include things as we used to back in the early days around things like citation practices and obviously there are good examples. I think International Feminist Journal Politics have a sort of set of guidelines around this. You know, please make sure you're citing people. And I mean, just, you know, there's some interesting issues here as well about who reviews and blind spots and so on, which is why, I mean, we can't make assumptions that people will always be attentive to these issues. One of the people we've just recently, who's just recently joined our editorial board for Critical Military Studies, I'd kind of come across her work before, and then I noticed and been reading it and how fantastic it was, and then sort of noticed a tweet from her one day sort of talking about how she'd received something like 2 invitations to review in, you know, a couple of years, or some insane kind of you know, kind of, and she's based in Latin America, and I just thought this was absurd, and I was so delighted when she, you know, joined our editorial board. I think there's a lot of people out there who perhaps are not getting asked to review, and then they perhaps know citations and know of work and their own work, and, you know, that we're missing, and we really need to kind of do more on this. So I think, yeah, sort of guidelines for reviewers might be a good start, but also trying to find you know, a sort of wider range of reviewers and so on is really important, and that's one of the things we're actively trying to work on.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's something I was, you know, conscious of, you know, A, editing the volume, and, you know, B, in, you know, reviewing work. And, you know, I think all of the, everyone who was working on the volume, was already, again, as you're saying, very attuned to, to these kind of citational politics anyway. So, at the back of my mind as an editor, I was thinking, okay, do I need to, push people to, either to cite more women, or, to make, or to make sure that they are, using the, not just using white scholarship. And, I don't think that was actually anything I had to actually say to anyone in the end. As a reviewer, on the other hand, I was reviewing something a few months ago, and I almost yelped at the almost complete lack of any women being cited in it. And, to the point that the first woman actually appeared on page 19. So, I very, very clearly pointed that out in the review, that, they needed to get on top of that. But yeah, I think that's something where, journal guidelines and series guidelines, can play a role in, helping to make it a norm that we do need to think about this. And, in particular, maybe when it comes to fields where, one might think that, there's very few women, or there's very few authors of colour, or very few women of colour working on something. Maybe that, that then needs to be a prod to, again, actually expand the frames of reference that, we as authors are using, when we're framing these topics. How can we frame it in a way that makes it possible to cite, to cite people we might not have thought of?
Yeah, some really good reflections. I'm just waiting for, I know there's some ECR people here. If they have any questions, now is your time to be asking to experts in, in the publishing world. I wonder actually if you can, in particular, I guess, Victoria, use this space to plug for why ESRC should, or ESRC, no, ECR, sorry, all these acronyms, why ECR should be going with the EUP book series. Because I know in particular, there seems to be, maybe this might be a King's College issue. I don't think it's just a King's College issue, but there's around this broader precarity of employment, putting your best foot forward, that you should be publishing with OUP or Cambridge University Press, right? So I just, I wonder if you can make a plug that maybe speaks back against that narrative a little bit.
Yeah, again, I don't want to sort of, I understand why those narratives exist, and obviously they're problematic, but I also understand why early career researchers, have to consider those things, and, it's a shame they do, and I think there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that they don't have to consider those as their main options in the future. But I think, generally I'd say, I think Edinburgh University Press, as I say, I think they've been a really fantastic group of people to work with. They're very attentive to inclusion issues. When we were first approached by Edinburgh, we were approached, I should say, by a number of publishers. When we first set up the journal, unsurprisingly, because that was new and exciting and so on, we had a number of editors get in touch with us suggesting that we may want a book series with their, press and commercial and, and otherwise. One of the reasons we went with Edinburgh University Press is because we knew that there is a game to be played, and that publishing with a university press is very important for early career researchers. But we were very clear with them as well that we wanted to prioritise publishing early career researchers, and that although we would bring in fantastic names and experienced editors like Catherine and others to kind of, as partly as vehicles to promote scholarship at all levels, including early career researchers, it was very important to us that we would be able to issue book contracts to people who were writing their first books. And we, part of that kind of quality control process and the conversation we had with them was around establishing this editorial board and establishing that we would have very involved practices of support for early career researchers. So, and depending on what stage people were at and their experience and so on, that we would kind of help them through the process in different kinds of ways, and that we as editors would take a very hands-on role, and we wouldn't just sort of, okay, the contract's been issued now and there you go, you're on your own. That we are there to support you know, authors through that process. And we wouldn't have signed that contract if we didn't think that EUP was serious about publishing early career researchers and their work, and supporting them through that process. So so yeah, it's not OUP, it's not CUP, but it is a UP, and Edinburgh are also distributed globally by Oxford University Press. So there's a kind of relationship there between university presses. So OUP do publicise and distribute globally EUP titles, and EUP themselves are often very well represented at the, you know, at big conferences overseas and so on. So they do get out there and they do a lot of good marketing themselves. And I think there's a sort of yeah, just a really interesting set of people that work there who have a lot of integrity, and are keen to just promote really good intellectual work, great scholarship, and that's the kind of people you want to work with. So I'd say if you do anything pertaining, you know, kind of related to kind of CMS issues, and I think that's a very broad kind of set of topics that we kind of focus on, and you're interested in having a conversation, please do get in touch with us. And yeah, and the other thing is that because again the inter and transdisciplinary scholarship exists there, some of our titles get cross-promoted in EUP lists because they've got some fantastic kind of other series going on, and we're able to sort of have some of our titles being, so, you know, we've got a title that we've just recently, a contract has just been recently issued, which will probably be quite importantly promoted in sort of literary studies as well, because it has so much to say to that as well. And we have another title coming through that's a historical analysis that will get a lot of attention that way as well. So it's nice to see that kind of support for that work.
I think one thing I'd add from a sort of volume editor's perspective is the copy editing and typesetting side of it was really good. And you know, I've had sort of, you know, variable experiences with copy editing over kind of various books. But you know, I really felt with EUP like it was always in the hands of people who cared about it. So that was excellent. And from what you were saying about marketing, I remember Chris Rossdale, who, you know, has written another excellent book for your series, you know, tweeting about the, I think it was the ISA, was it BETA? I can't remember. One conference launch, and they turned up with drums of whiskey. And I thought, I wonder if we can have that for making war on bodies, and then of course COVID happened. So I mean, without normalising, you know, the presence of alcohol at academic events, because, you know, that itself is, you know, something which is, you know, potentially causes exclusions. You know, it kind of showed the care that EUP actually had for these books, and you know, that is, you know, something that, you know, I'm very pleased to have had taken off this series.
I think that's so great that you're both highlighting that you know, particularly, yeah, for people who it's first book, is that you have a publisher who is excited about your work, who wants to promote your work, and who has care and diligence in taking you through the process. And with the copy editing stage and all of that, that, you know, kind of the mentorship and support throughout the entire process that I'm not sure a lot of early career researchers get mentored in, that those are key important parts of publishing too, right? That are time consuming, and the idea again with the broader imposter syndrome, you know, that comes with early career, just, yeah, having that support, having a publisher who really is excited about your project is important, because the early career researchers that are in this virtual space, and you know, I'm looking at some of the list and know a lot of their work, and they do some fantastic work, and I hope that, you know, it does get recognized, and that they believe in their work, because it's really important things that our junior colleagues need to say, right, or have to say, and I want to hear what they have to say. So It doesn't look like we're a chatty group, which is fine. I mean, the three of us have had, I think, a good discussion here too. So I guess, with just the last few minutes, I just want to leave the floor back to you, Victoria and Catherine, if there's any kind of final reflections or thoughts you want to say before we close and everyone can grab a lunch, or at least if you're in London, go out for a walk in the sun the last day before. Who knows? So yeah, I'll just hand the floor to both of you for your final reflections.
Sorry,
Please
Catherine.
submit things. Sorry.
You go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say, please submit things. It's ECRs who are doing the most original work out there, because you've been starting these new projects for the first time. You are doing the work you do because you're looking at something that no one else has looked at that way. And nobody can publish it if you don't get these submissions out. So ask editors if they're interested. Because the chances are they will be. Everybody in publishing and series editing and so on wants to be excited about things, and you can make them excited. So get in touch with your work.
Absolutely. Yeah, can agree more. I think it's very hard to take those kind of first steps, and I think even with journal articles it can be quite intimidating. With books, I think even more so. Writing books is really hard. There's a reason I've only written one so far. Yeah, I'm still kind of recovering, I think, from that. But yeah, I mean, it's important to try and get your work out there, and and also if it doesn't, if you get rejections, please don't think that's any great kind of signifier of the wider quality of your work. It might just be that it isn't the best fit for a journal, or whatever. It could be for a plethora of reasons, and good editors will explain why they may reject work. And it also might just be a case of you've got something really important to say, but you just need to kind of develop it a bit more, and so on. And again, hopefully journal editors and book series editors will try and give you that feedback so that you can develop that work. So please keep going, please keep trying, because yeah, I'm sure you will have very important things to say. And as Amanda said, we want to hear those things. And one of the reasons why, I work with so many early career researchers and enjoy that so much is because the things that you're doing are so innovative and exciting. Once you get into an established academic position, you have a lot of different kinds of demands on your time, and not the same pressures by any means that early career researchers experience, but other pressures that mean that sometimes you don't have that kind of headspace and that kind of creativity that early career researchers have. And early career researchers teach the rest of the discipline masses of things, and so we need to hear what you have to say. So please keep trying to get your work out there.
What a way to end our lunchtime seminar. Thank you both so much for sharing your insights and being inspiring, in your pointers and advice and reflections too. And thank you, audience, for tuning in and participating and making this an engaged space. Catherine and Victoria both put their email details in the chat box if you want to get in touch with them. I'm sure they'll field any questions, however large or small, for you if you're interested. And yeah, and please stay tuned for next Wednesday. We have another early career researcher of ours, Sarah Perrett, talking about her fascinating work around border technologies, security. So please come stay tuned. If you want to grab a cup of tea Wednesday afternoon and listen to a fantastic talk, please do so. Again, thank you so much, presenters. Silent clap to both of you and everyone else. So have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you.